Hello, everybody. This is Kevin. I just wanted to give you a quick breakdown as to what's been happening with the Ivy Foreign Equity Fund. This particularly happy-go-lucky fellow here is Paul Musson, and I'm sure I've talked to you about his worrywart attitude, how he's pessimistic towards many things. You may be able to tell by his face as he's talking now to the camera. I just want to give you a quick snippet of what he's talking about, and we're going to cover off a couple of other things.
So there are a number of events that we're keeping an eye on. The first one obviously is the Trump trade tariffs and trade war with China. There's a G20 event coming up at the end of this month. Maybe things will get resolved then, we're not sure.
I should also say that this is been taped in November of last year, so this is when all of the things were just starting to kick in and become a little bit more serious.
But on top of that, you have quantitative tightening, where the Federal Reserve is actually shrinking its balance sheet after years of expanding it. You have rising interest rates. You have what we think are still very rich valuations of all asset categories.
Let's look at what he means by rich valuations and how that has affected his portfolio over time. So what we're looking at here is the performance since inception of the Ivy Foreign Equity Fund. He started in the late 90s, so he's seen the bulk of this performance. And what you can see here are two specific times when his concerns about rich valuation helped the portfolio on a macro basis, even though, again, his focus is on the individual businesses inside the portfolio. Let me just quickly mark this up here. So the first area where we see it clearly is the tech crash, which started right around here and ended around there. And then the financial crisis of the mid-2000s, which sort of started to happen in the fall of 2007 and ended somewhere in that area, sort of around the start of 2009. Although, of course, lots of people felt the effects of it longer than that time frame. So what we can see here is the orange is the Morningstar Global Equity Average, so it's sort of a proxy for the index, and we see it falling quite substantially during that period and quite a bit during this period as well. Whereas with the Ivy Fund, you can see he actually went up during this time frame, and he did a flatter. He obviously still went down a little bit because the financial crisis involved more of the companies that he was involved in, whether that's banks or manufacturers, or there was a lot more companies caught up in the financial crisis. He never was a big fan of the early technology companies anyway. Actually, he's not a big fan of the current technology companies, but that's not because he has a problem with the business. It's because he has a problem with the current stock price. So he may end up with somebody like Microsoft or Apple in the portfolio in the future, but the price has to crash from a lot farther than it has so far. But these kinds of downturns, the big scary ones, when he hangs on or even makes more money, is why one of the reasons I like him so much as a management team, because he sticks to this and he doesn't predict that the stock market's going to crash. He just talks about rich valuations, and by that he means specifically the process he uses to help choose which businesses he wants to invest in. So this is his end of the year report that he releases to advisors. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but I do want to talk about a couple of things you see in here. The number one thing being, he says the most common reason for portfolio changes is the change in valuation. In other words, stock price going up and down, and that the stock price is negatively correlated to the valuation. So in other words, the greater the value of the company in his mind, so the better a purchase is, the lower the stock price is. So he, of course, wants crashes because he wants to buy it cheap. Conversely, if the company is doing all right, but its stock price is skyrocketing, he sees that as being an overvalued company, and he will start to scale back on that. So it comes down to he's constantly going against what the market believes. He's playing it against the herd. And what he talks about over here is his value discipline. So in other words, what he sees I can't doubly highlight it. Our value discipline, which just takes the form of an expected rate of return. So that's the 5-year plan where he expects to make 12% a year. So just recently, over this last quarter, here's some of the things that he has done. He has made a new purchase into Comcast Corp, and he talks here about what's really been happening and why they like it. They've added a position of 1.8%. That's a starter position. So he likes to have 3 to 5%, but he's going to sort of dip his toe in and see how it does. And then they've been doing a little bits of increases to Unilever, Henkel, UPS, Colgate, etc., etc. So what they're doing there is they're buying more of it because they know that the business is going ahead and the stock price has actually stayed flat or has fallen, so they've added bits and pieces to those. Conversely, with some of these companies here at the end, whether he's talking about Granger, the janitorial supply company, or Oracle, the networking firm, he's cut back on those because the valuations have gotten higher than what he thinks they're worth. So as you can see through the year, he's making relatively minor changes, 1%, 2%, 0.5% to the portfolio, but he's constantly tweaking it. The reason that's important is that so many of people have no concept that this kind of stuff is happening behind the scenes inside the portfolio, because all you're receiving is a single line. You're not seeing all the changes that are happening inside the portfolio. So I wanted to show you some of the things that he has been doing. I wanted to play for you some of his view about what's been going on recently. Wanted to remind you of his track record and why we're using it, and remind you of his 2 key processes, which are creating that expected rate of return using a business plan for the individual businesses inside the portfolio, and also his discipline at working at getting rid of companies or not buying companies that he believes are too expensive. Thank you very much.